The scream tore through the mountain air like a blade, and Vaughn Voss reacted before thought could catch him, his boots already hammering against the packed earth of the bridge platform as his eyes found the source. A wedding carriage, white ribbons streaming, its matched grays running wild down the rutted switchback road with no driver on the box and the reins trailing uselessly beneath their hooves. He vaulted onto his chestnut mare without touching the stirrup, years of warden patrol turning the motion instinct, and drove his heels in hard. The mare lunged forward, dirt spraying, and Vaughn leaned low over her neck as they shot toward the descending road. His mind catalogued the disaster unfolding ahead with the terrible clarity of a man who had seen this before. The team in full panic, foam already flecking their necks, the carriage swaying on its springs, one wheel lifting on every sharp turn, the road narrowing as it curved toward the bridge, his bridge, the one he had rebuilt with his own hands after the collapse 5 years ago that had taken 3 lives while he stood helpless on the far bank. The bridge was safe now, tested and retested, every board sound and every rope secure, but the approach was not. 50 yards before the crossing, the outer edge of the road had crumbled in the spring floods, leaving a gap where the ground simply fell away into the gorge. The temporary rail he had erected would snap like kindling under the weight of a runaway carriage. Another scream higher now, edged with a terror that reached inside Vaughn's chest and squeezed. He could see the carriage driver's seat empty, the door to the interior swinging open and shut with each lurch. Whoever had been hired to deliver this bride had abandoned his post, probably thrown or jumped when the horses spooked. Coward. Vaughn's jaw set hard enough to ache as he urged his mare faster, angling to intercept on the inside curve where the road widened slightly. The distance closed with agonizing slowness despite the speed. Vaughn could hear his own breathing, harsh and rhythmic, could feel the mare's muscles bunching and releasing beneath him. They were gaining, but the carriage was already past the halfway point, already committed to the descent. If he could not reach it before the broken section, the whole rig would plunge over the edge, and the woman inside would die screaming just like the family in the wagon 5 years ago, the ones he had not been fast enough to save. Not again. Never again. He drove the mare harder, leaning so far forward he was nearly standing in the stirrups, and finally pulled alongside the careening carriage at the point where the road curved sharpest. Through the swinging door he caught a glimpse of green skin and white fabric, a figure thrown against the far wall by the violent rocking. The scream had stopped, replaced by a worse silence that might mean unconsciousness or simply breath held in final terror. There was no time for a better plan. Vaughn kicked his feet free of the stirrups and launched himself sideways off the mare's back, his hands catching the door frame of the carriage. His shoulder slammed into the wood hard enough to send pain shooting down his arm, but his grip held. He hauled himself up and through the door in one continuous motion born of desperation, landing in a heap on the carriage floor as the whole vehicle lurched sickeningly to one side. The orc woman was braced in the corner, one hand locked around the seat support and the other clutching the wall. Her eyes, dark amber and wide with fear, fixed on him. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 20, with the small tusks and pointed ears of her kind just visible beneath the elaborate braids of her black hair. Her wedding dress, all lace and pearl buttons, was torn at the shoulder where she had been thrown against something sharp. "Hold on," Vaughn shouted, though she clearly already was. He lunged for the driver's box, throwing himself through the small forward window. The reins were dragging beneath the horses, tangled in their legs and making the panic worse. He had perhaps 10 seconds before they reached the damaged section of road. He could not reach the reins from inside. He had to get on top, Vaughn pulled himself up and out, the wind immediately tearing at him, threatening to rip him loose. The carriage roof was rounded and slick with mountain dew. He lay flat and reached forward, stretching until his fingers brushed the driver's seat, then caught hold and pulled. The carriage hit a rut and bucked, nearly shaking him loose, but he held on with a grip strengthened by 5 years of bridge building and road maintenance. He slid forward onto the driver's seat and looked down at the tangle of reins and the gap-toothed edge of the road rushing toward them. 5 seconds, maybe less. Vaughn planted his boots against the footboard and leaped forward onto the rear horse's back, landing astride the terrified gray. The animal screamed and bucked, but Vaughn locked his legs around its barrel and reached down, stretching until his fingers closed around leather. He caught one rein, then the other, and hauled back with all the strength in his shoulders and back. "Whoa!" The command came out as a roar. "Whoa, damn you!" The horses fought him, their panic a living thing, but Vaughn had gentled half-wild stock for his father's farm before he became a warden, and he knew the trick was not just strength but persistence. He pulled again, steady and unyielding, and kept his voice rolling over them in a continuous stream of sounds that were more tone than words. The gray's ears flicked back. The off-horse stumbled, and that momentary break in stride let Vaughn haul them down from a gallop to a canter. The broken edge of the road was 20 feet ahead. 15. He pulled harder, leaning back so far he was nearly lying on the horse's rump, and shouted, "Whoa, whoa, easy now, easy." 10 feet. The lead horse's hooves scattered loose stones over the edge. 5 feet. The carriage wheels locked as Vaughn threw his whole weight into one final, desperate pull. The team stopped with their front hooves at the very lip of the gap, where the road simply ended in a raw edge of crumbled stone and exposed earth. The carriage rocked forward on its springs, and for one terrible moment Vaughn thought momentum would carry it over anyway, but then it settled back with a groan of wood and metal. The horses stood trembling, heads low, flanks heaving. Vaughn sat astride the rear gray and tried to remember how to breathe. His hands were locked so tight around the reins that his fingers had gone white. Slowly, carefully, he unclenched them and slid down to the ground. His legs nearly gave out when his boots hit earth. He caught the carriage wheel to steady himself, and stood there for a moment with his forehead pressed against the painted wood, listening to the thunder of his own heartbeat. A sound from inside the carriage brought his head up. He moved to the door on unsteady legs and pulled it open. The orc woman stared at him from her corner, still braced, still holding on as if the world might start spinning again at any moment. Her breathing was quick and shallow, her green skin several shades paler than it should be. When she spoke, her voice came out raw. "You stopped it." "Yes." Vaughn realized he was still half inside the doorway, looming, and stepped back to give her space. "You are safe now." She did not move except to slowly release her grip on the seat support. Her fingers remained curled, locked in the shape of holding on. She looked at them as if they belonged to someone else, then raised her eyes to Vaughn again. The driver jumped. I saw him jump and roll, and then the horses they ran. I screamed, but there was no one, only the edge getting closer, and I could not. Her voice fractured. She drew a breath and visibly forced steadiness back into it. "You came. Why did you come?" "I am the bridge warden. This is my road." Vaughn offered his hand. "Can you step down? We need to move the carriage back before the edge gives way further." She looked at his hand for a long moment before taking it. Her palm was warm, her grip stronger than he expected as she stepped down from the carriage. She swayed when her feet touched the ground, and Vaughn steadied her with a hand at her elbow. This close, he could see that her eyes were not just amber but flecked with gold, and that the tear in her dress revealed a scraped shoulder beneath. "You are hurt." "It is nothing." She pulled away from his touch, though not unkindly, and looked down at herself. The elaborate wedding dress was dusty and torn, the skirts tangled around her legs. She reached up and pulled something from her hair, a string of white flowers that had come loose from the braids. She stared at it for a moment, then let it fall to the ground. I was being delivered like a package. Now I suppose I will arrive late and damaged. There was something brittle in her voice, something that made Vaughn look at her more closely. She was beautiful in the way orc women were, all strong lines and direct gazes, but there was no joy in her face, no anticipation. Only a kind of weary resignation that sat wrong on someone so young. Where were you being taken? To Dunmore Crossing, to marry a man named Garrick Thane. She said the name as if it tasted bad. Do you know the place? Vaughn knew it. A mining settlement 2 valleys over, rough and barely lawful. I know it, and I know Garrick Thane by reputation. He kept his voice neutral, but something must have shown in his face because the orc woman's mouth twisted. Then you know what manner of man I am going to. She looked back at the carriage, at the white ribbons now limp and dirty, then at the gap in the road where she had nearly died. Perhaps I should have let the horses take me over. It might have been kinder. Do not say that. The words came out sharper than Vaughn intended. He gentled his tone. Whatever waits in Dunmore Crossing, it is not worth dying for, or dying to avoid. She studied him with those gold-flecked eyes. You do not know what you are talking about. Maybe not. But I know that living gives you choices and dying takes them all away. Vaughn turned toward the horses, who still stood trembling and sweat-streaked. He began checking them over for injury, running his hands down their legs, speaking in the low, calm voice that settled spooked animals. Over his shoulder he said, "What is your name?" A pause. Then, quietly, "Dara." "Dara Ashfeld. Vaughn Voss." He moved to the second horse, checking its hooves for stones. "I am sorry we are meeting under these circumstances, Dara Ashfeld. Are you?" There was a challenge in her voice now, a spark of something that pushed back against the resignation. Most humans would have let an orc bride go over the edge. One less greenskin in the world. Vaughn straightened and turned to face her fully. "I am not most humans." They looked at each other across the dusty road, the carriage standing between them and the gorge, and something passed in that moment that Vaughn could not name. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of one person by another, stripped of all the usual barriers. The sound of hoofbeats broke the moment. 3 riders were coming up the road from below, moving fast. Vaughn recognized the lead rider, a weasel-faced man named Corbin who sometimes worked as a hired guard. The other 2 he did not know, but they had the look of Thane's men, hard and watchful. Corbin pulled up short when he saw the scene, his eyes going from the stopped carriage to Vaughn to Dara and back again. "Warden, we heard screaming. Is the package damaged?" The way he said package, looking at Dara, made Vaughn's hands curl into fists. He kept his voice level. "The lady is unharmed. The carriage team bolted when your driver abandoned his post. Where is he? Drunk in the ditch a mile back with a broken arm, last I saw." Corbin dismounted and moved toward Dara with a proprietary air that raised Vaughn's hackles. "Come on, girl. We will get you on a horse and finish the delivery. Mr. Thane is waiting." Dara did not move. She stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her, and Vaughn saw her knuckles whiten. "The horses need rest before they can pull again," Vaughn said, "and the carriage needs inspection." "That was a hard run. Then we will take her on horseback like I said." Corbin reached for Dara's arm. Vaughn stepped between them. It was not a dramatic movement, just a simple shift that put him in the way, but the message was clear. Corbin's eyes narrowed. "This is not your concern, Warden. We are here to collect Mr. Thane's bride and deliver her as contracted." Was she contracted, or was her debt? Vaughn kept his tone mild, but he did not move aside. Corbin's expression flickered. "That is Thane's business, and this road is mine. I am telling you the horses need rest. An hour, maybe two. You can wait at my station." Vaughn gestured up the slope toward the bridge and the small warden's cabin visible beyond it. "There is water and shade." For a moment it hung in the balance. Corbin's two companions had hands on their weapons, and Vaughn was unarmed except for the work knife at his belt. But this was his territory, his authority, and Corbin knew it. The man's jaw worked, then he spat to the side. 1 hour. Then we are taking her, rested or not. Fair enough. Vaughn turned to the carriage team and began unhitching them. Behind him, he could feel Dara's eyes on his back, burning with questions she did not ask. The next hour unfolded with a strange, tense domesticity. Vaughn led the team up to the station, a sturdy cabin built of stone and timber on the near side of the bridge. Corbin and his men took the offered water and settled in the shade, watching with lazy menace. Dara stood apart, still in her ruined wedding dress, looking out over the gorge as if searching for answers in its depths. Vaughn rubbed down the horses with hands that knew the work so well he did not have to think about it. His mind was elsewhere, turning over what he knew of Garrick Thane. The man was a mine owner, prosperous enough but with a reputation for sharp dealing and cruelty to those under his thumb. He employed orc laborers in his mines, paid them in scrip that was only good at his own stores, kept them perpetually in debt. If Dara was being delivered to him as a bride, there was money or obligation involved. No one married Garrick Thane for love. When the horses were settled, Vaughn fetched the carriage and inspected it thoroughly. The wheels were sound, the axles intact. There was no reason to delay further except the sick feeling in his gut at the thought of sending Dara on to Dunmore Crossing. He found her standing at the bridge rail, looking down at the water far below. She did not turn when he approached, but her voice was steady. "This is a fine bridge." "New, yes. 5 years old. I built it myself after the old one collapsed." The words came harder than they should have. 3 people died in that collapse. A family on their way to settle in the upper valley. I was too far away to help, could only watch them fall. Now she did turn, her amber eyes searching his face. "And today you were close enough." "Today I was close enough." He leaned against the rail beside her, not touching but near. "Dara, what is waiting for you in Dunmore Crossing? The truth." Her hands tightened on the rail. For a long moment he thought she would not answer, but then the words came in a rush, low and bitter. "My father owed Thane money. A loan to buy seed and equipment, taken when the harvest failed 2 years running. When father died last winter, the debt passed to me. Thane said I could work it off in his mines, or I could marry him and the debt would be forgiven. He called it generous." She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "I had until summer to decide. This morning his men came with a wedding dress and said I had decided." Vaughn's jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. "That is not a marriage, that is bondage. It is legal enough. The contract was signed before witnesses. By you, by father, before he died. The bride clause was in the loan terms, they said. I never saw it, but Thane has the papers." Dara's voice dropped. "I am property now, a debt paid in flesh." The words hung in the air like smoke. Vaughn wanted to say something, anything, to refute them, but he knew the way the law worked in places like Dunmore Crossing. Might and money made right, and Garrick Thane had both. "Come on, girl," Corbin's shout carried across the yard. "Time is up. Get yourself ready to ride." Dara drew a long breath and pushed away from the rail. Her face had closed again, gone back to that terrible resignation. She walked toward the waiting men like someone walking to the gallows, each step an act of will. Vaughn watched her go and felt something crack open in his chest. in the place where he had locked away the guilt and grief of 5 years ago. He had not been able to save that family. He had rebuilt the bridge, made the road safer, dedicated himself to making sure no one else died on his watch, but the weight of those 3 lives had never lifted. It had just settled deeper, become part of the foundation he built his days on. But this was not about him. This was about a young orc woman being delivered into bondage because of her father's debts and her own lack of choices. Vaughn moved before the thought was fully formed. He crossed the yard in long strides and caught up to Dara just as Corbin was reaching to help her onto his horse. "Wait." Corbin turned with exaggerated patience. "We have waited long enough, Warden. This is not your concern." "I am making it my concern. That marriage contract is fraudulent." Vaughn put himself between Dara and the mounted men again, feeling the weight of their stares. Debt bondage disguised as marriage is illegal under territorial law. If Thane wants a bride, he needs her consent freely given, not coerced by threats of mine work. "That is a matter for the magistrate, not a bridge warden." Corbin's voice had gone hard. "Step aside. The next magistrate circuit is in 3 weeks. I am formally requesting a stay until Dara Ashfeld can present her case." Vaughn pulled the warden's badge from his pocket, the small silver star that gave him authority on this stretch of road. "As the ranking territorial officer present, I have that right." Corbin's face darkened. "You are overstepping, Voss. Thane will hear about this." "I expect he will." Vaughn did not move. Behind him he could feel Dara standing very still, barely breathing. One of Corbin's companions leaned over and muttered something. Corbin listened, then nodded curtly. He swung back up onto his horse and looked down at Vaughn with undisguised contempt. "Keep her, then. But when Thane comes for what is his, do not expect your badge to protect you. Or her." He wheeled his horse and spurred it down the road, his companions following. Their hoofbeats faded into the afternoon stillness. Vaughn stood in the settling dust and wondered what he had just done. Behind him, Dara's voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" He turned to face her. She was staring at him with something like shock, her hands twisted in the ruined lace of her dress. "Why did you do that? You do not know me. You owe me nothing. And now you have made an enemy of a powerful man for the sake of an orc girl you met an hour ago." Vaughn looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the green skin and tusks to the person beneath. Young and frightened and trying so hard to be brave. He thought of the family that had fallen from the old bridge, the ones he could not save. He thought of all the days since then that he had spent making this road safer, trying to balance the scales. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I could not send you to Dunmore Crossing knowing what waits there." Dara's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back furiously. "You have only delayed it. Thane will come, and he will have the law on his side. That contract exists. Then we will find a way to break it." Vaughn heard the certainty in his own voice and wondered where it came from. 3 weeks until the magistrate arrives. That is time enough to build a case. You do not understand. Thane owns the magistrate. He owns half the territory. Dara's voice cracked. There is no fighting him. There is always a fight. The question is whether you are willing to make it. Vaughn took a step closer. "I cannot promise we will win, Dara, but I promise you will not face this alone." She looked at him for a long time, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she drew herself up and some of the brittle resignation fell away, replaced by something harder and brighter. "Then I will fight. If you are fool enough to help me, I will fight." "Good." Vaughn allowed himself a small smile. "Come inside. You need food and rest, and we need a plan." The cabin was simple but well kept. A single main room with a sleeping loft above and a stone fireplace that served for both heating and cooking. Vaughn had built most of it himself during his first year as warden, shaping it into a place of order and function. He gestured Dara to the table while he pulled bread and cheese and dried meat from his stores. She sat carefully, as if unsure whether she was allowed, and watched him move about the cabin. When he set the food in front of her, she did not immediately reach for it. "I have no way to pay you for this. I am not asking for payment." Vaughn sat across from her and pushed the bread closer. "Eat. You have had a difficult day." She took the bread slowly, broke off a piece, and ate with small, precise bites. After a moment, Vaughn joined her, and they shared the meal in a silence that was almost companionable. Through the open door came the sound of the river below and the wind in the pines, familiar music that usually soothed him. Today, it only underscored how much had changed in the space of a few hours. When the food was gone, Dara folded her hands on the table and looked at him directly. "Tell me about this magistrate. Is there any chance he will rule fairly? Magistrate Holloway is not owned by Thane, whatever you have heard. He is old and set in his ways, but he follows the law." Vaughn considered how much to say. "The problem is that the law allows for contracts like your father's if they were properly witnessed and recorded. We will need to prove either that the contract was fraudulent from the start or that it was signed under duress. It was signed in good faith, as far as I know. Father trusted Thane." Bitterness crept into Dara's voice. He did not read the fine print about the bride clause, or perhaps he thought I would be willing. He never asked. "Do you have a copy of the contract?" "No." "Thane kept all the papers." Vaughn frowned. "Then we will need to get access to the original or find witnesses who saw what terms your father agreed to." He ran a hand through his hair, thinking, "There must be someone in your village who knows the details, someone your father spoke to. Perhaps, but they are all afraid of Thane. He controls the work in 3 settlements. People need his mines, his stores." Dara's shoulders sagged. "No one will speak against him. We will find a way." Vaughn said it with more confidence than he felt, but he needed her to believe. Needed her to hold onto the spark of fight he had seen earlier. "For now, you are safe here. Rest, and tomorrow we will start gathering what we need." Dara nodded slowly. She looked around the cabin, taking in the neat shelves and the tools hung on their pegs, the books stacked beside the fireplace. "Where will I sleep?" "The loft. I will take the floor down here." Vaughn stood and fetched a blanket from the chest by the wall. "It is not much, but it is private. It is more than I expected when I woke this morning." Dara rose and moved toward the ladder, then paused with one hand on the rung. "Vaughn Voss, thank you. I do not understand why you are helping me, but thank you." "You are welcome, Dara Ashfeld." She climbed to the loft, and he heard the soft sounds of her settling. Vaughn banked the fire and laid out his blanket on the floor near the hearth. He lay down and stared at the ceiling beams, listening to the cabin creak and settle around him. He had committed himself to something that could end very badly. Thane had resources and reach. A warden's authority only extended so far, and interfering with a contract dispute could be seen as overstepping. If Holloway ruled in Thane's favor, Vaughn could lose his position. Worse, he would have to watch Dara be taken to Dunmore Crossing anyway, and this time he would not be able to stop it. But when he closed his eyes, he saw not the future but the past. A wagon going over the edge of a broken bridge and himself too far away to help. The sound of screaming cut short by the impact, the terrible silence after. He had not been able to save them. But today he had been close enough, fast enough, and Dara was alive because of it. That had to mean something. That had to be worth fighting for. Vaughn slept poorly and woke before dawn with a plan forming. He built up the fire quietly and set water to boil, then climbed to the loft to wake Dara. She was already awake, sitting with her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around them, looking out the small window at the lightening sky. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little." "You, enough." Vaughn leaned against the loft rail. "I have been thinking. We need to see that contract, but Thane will never hand it over willingly. There is someone who might help us, though. My cousin works as a clerk in the Territorial Records Office. If your father's loan was properly recorded, there will be a copy on file." Dara turned to look at him, hope and skepticism warring in her face. "And if there is not? Then the contract has no legal standing. Unrecorded debt agreements are not enforceable in magistrate court." Vaughn allowed himself a small smile. Thane might have been too confident to bother with the paperwork. "When can we go?" "Today. The records office is a half-day's ride from here." Vaughn descended the ladder. "Get dressed. I will saddle the horses." Dara climbed down wearing the ruined wedding dress, her only garment. She looked at it ruefully. "I do not suppose you have anything else I could wear. This draws attention." Vaughn rummaged in his clothing chest and came up with a shirt and trousers that would be too large but serviceable. He handed them to her and turned his back while she changed. When she said it was safe to look, he found her rolling up sleeves and cuffs, transforming herself from bride to traveler. They set out as the sun crested the mountains, Vaughn on his chestnut mare and Dara on one of the Carriage grays, now rested and calm. The road wound down from the high bridge country into rolling foothills thick with pine and aspen. They rode in comfortable silence for the first hour, then Dara spoke. "Tell me about this cousin of yours. Will he help?" "She, Vivian. And yes, she will help if she can. She has no love for men like Thane." Vaughn guided his mare around a washed-out section of trail. "Vivian was engaged once to a mine supervisor who turned out to be a bastard. She broke it off, and he tried to sue her for breach of promise. The magistrate threw it out, but it left her with strong opinions about contracts used as weapons. I am sorry she went through that. She says it taught her who to trust." Vaughn glanced over at Dara. "How are you doing? That is a long ride if you are not used to it." "I grew up on a farm. I know how to sit a horse." But she shifted in the saddle, adjusting her weight, and Vaughn made a mental note to rest the animals more frequently than he usually would. They stopped at midday by a creek to water the horses and eat the bread and cheese Vaughn had packed. Dara sat on a fallen log and stretched her legs out, wincing slightly. "Sore?" Vaughn asked. "A little. I have not ridden this far in some time." She took the water skin he offered and drank deeply. "How much farther?" "Another 3 hours, maybe less." Vaughn sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "Dara, I need to ask you something. If we break this contract and you are free, what will you do? Where will you go?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at the creek. "I do not know. I have no family left, no home. The farm was sold to pay father's debts, what little Thane did not claim." Her voice went soft. "I have not let myself think about it. Freedom seemed too far away to plan for. You could stay in the territory. There is work for those willing to do it, and people who do not care about green skin or tusks." Vaughn kept his tone carefully neutral. "The upper valley is opening up to new settlers. Good land if you can work it." Dara turned to look at him, her amber eyes searching. "Why do you care what I do after? Once I am free of Thane, your obligation is done." "It is not about obligation." Vaughn found himself meeting her gaze and holding it. "I would like to know that you are safe, that this all meant something more than just delaying the inevitable." "You barely know me." "I know enough." He looked away, back to the creek and the play of light on water. "I know you did not give up in that carriage, even when you thought you were going to die. I know you are willing to fight now, when it would be easier to just accept what Thane has planned. That is enough to know you deserve better." Dara was silent. When Vaughn risked a glance at her, he found her blinking hard, her jaw set. She drew a breath and stood. "We should keep moving. The sooner we reach your cousin, the sooner we know what we are fighting." They mounted and rode on through the afternoon, descending into broader valleys where farms spread out across the bottomland, and the road widened to accommodate wagon traffic. People they passed gave them curious looks, a human man and an orc woman riding together, but no one stopped them or offered insult. Vaughn kept his warden's badge visible and his hand near his belt knife, but the precaution proved unnecessary. The Territorial Records Office was housed in a squat stone building in the town of Riverside Bend, sharing space with the tax collector and the land surveyor. Vaughn led Dara inside and found Vivian at her desk, surrounded by ledgers and stacks of paper tied with ribbon. Vivian Vance looked up and her eyebrows rose. She was a few years older than Vaughn, with the same dark hair and sharp features that ran in the family. When she spoke, her voice carried the particular blend of affection and exasperation that only cousins managed. "Vaughn, what trouble are you bringing me today? The kind that needs a good records clerk." Vaughn gestured to Dara. "Vivian, this is Dara Ashfeld. Dara, my cousin Vivian." Vivian's eyes went from Dara's face to the ill-fitting clothes to the exhaustion visible in every line of her frame. She stood and came around the desk. "You look like you have had a hell of a week and it is only midweek. Sit down before you fall down." She pulled a chair over and waited until Dara sat, then turned to Vaughn. "Explain," he explained. Vivian listened without interrupting, her expression growing progressively darker. When he finished, she crossed her arms and leaned against her desk. "Garrick Thane. Of course it is Garrick Thane." She shook her head. "That man has been finding new ways to exploit people for as long as I have worked here. All right. Let me see what we have on file." She disappeared into the back room where the older records were kept, leaving Vaughn and Dara to wait. The office was quiet except for the scratch of a clerk's pen in the corner and the tick of the wall clock. Dara sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, but Vaughn could see the tension in her shoulders. "Vivian will help if anyone can," he said quietly, "and if the contract is properly filed. Then we find another way to fight it." Vaughn wished he sounded more certain. "One step at a time." Vivian returned after what felt like an hour but was probably only 20 minutes. She was carrying a leather-bound ledger and her face was grim. "I found it. Loan agreement between Garrick Thane and one Matthias Ashfeld, dated 16 months ago." She set the ledger on the desk and opened it to a marked page. "The terms are exactly what you described. Loan of $300 territorial dollars for farm equipment and supplies, to be repaid at 8% interest within 1 year. Upon default or death of the debtor, outstanding balance to be satisfied either through labor contract or by marriage of the debtor's heir to the creditor." Dara closed her eyes. "So it is legal." "Legal, but there is a problem." Vivian tapped the page. "This clause here, it says the heir must consent to the marriage in writing. Without that written consent, the contract defaults to the labor option only." Vaughn leaned over to look at the document. "Did Dara sign anything?" "No, I never signed anything." Dara's voice was sharp with sudden hope. "They just came this morning and put me in the dress. There was no signing." "Then Thane has no grounds to claim you as a bride." Vivian allowed herself a small smile. "He can demand you work off the debt, but he cannot force marriage, and forced labor without consent is bondage, which is illegal." "He will say I consented by getting in the carriage," Dara said. "Let him say it. Without your signature on the consent document, he has no legal leg to stand on." Vivian pulled out a piece of paper and began writing rapidly. "I am making you a certified copy of this record. When the magistrate comes, you present this and testify that you never signed the consent. Holloway will have to rule in your favor." Vaughn felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of tension he had been carrying since the moment he decided to stand between Dara and Corbin. "Vivian, you are a wonder. I am a clerk who follows the law. There is a difference." She finished writing and affixed her seal to the bottom of the copy. "But between you and me, I am glad to put a thorn in Garrick Thane's side. The man is a blight." She handed the document to Dara, who took it with shaking hands. "Is this really real? Can this actually work?" "It can work if you are willing to stand up in front of Holloway and testify." Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. "Thane will be there. His lawyer will try to make you look like a liar or a cheat. It will not be easy. I can do it." Dara folded the document carefully and held it against her chest. "If this is what it takes, I can do it." "Good." Vivian turned to Vaughn. "You know Thane will not let this go without a fight. He will come for her before the magistrate arrives if he can." "I know. We will be ready." Vaughn stood and offered his hand to Vivian. "Thank you, cousin. I owe you. You owe me a full explanation later over a drink." Vivian shook his hand and then, impulsively, pulled him into a brief hug. "Be careful, Vaughn. Do not let your guilt over the old bridge push you into something you cannot handle. This is not about the bridge, isn't it?" Vivian pulled back and looked at him steadily. "You have been trying to save everyone who crosses that bridge for 5 years. Maybe this time you are just trying to save someone who needs saving, and that is different. Think about why." Vaughn did not have an answer for that, so he simply nodded. He and Dara left the office and collected their horses. The ride back to the bridge station would take them well into the night, but neither wanted to stay in town where Thane's men might be looking. They rode until dusk, then made camp in a grove of aspens beside the road. Vaughn built a small fire, and they ate more of the provisions he had brought, supplemented by trout he caught from a nearby stream. As the stars came out and the fire burned down to coals, they sat across from each other and talked. Dara told him about the farm where she grew up, a small holding in a mixed community where orc and human families worked side by side. Her father had been a good man but a poor businessman, always trusting, always believing the best of people. When the harvests failed, he had borrowed rather than ask for help from neighbors, too proud to admit he was struggling. "He thought he was protecting me," Dara said, staring into the coals. "Taking on debt so I would not have to see him beg, but in the end the debt is all he left me." "He also left you his strength, his belief in doing the right thing." Vaughn poked at the fire with a stick. "You could have gone quietly to Dunmore Crossing, made the best of a bad situation, but you are fighting instead. Because you showed me I could." Dara raised her eyes to his. "If you had not stopped that carriage, if you had not stood up to Corbin, I would have given up. I had given up already in my mind. You gave me a reason to hope." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Vaughn felt the weight of her gaze and the sudden awareness that they were alone out here, miles from anyone, with only the fire and the stars as witnesses. He cleared his throat. "You should get some rest. We have a long ride tomorrow, and then we need to prepare for the magistrate's arrival." Dara nodded and moved to the bedroll Vaughn had laid out for her on the far side of the fire. She settled in and pulled the blanket up, but her eyes remained open, reflecting firelight. "Vaughn, your cousin asked you to think about why you are helping me. Have you?" He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, the words came slowly, feeling their way into the truth. 5 years ago, I failed to save 3 people. I have built my entire life since then around making sure it does not happen again. Every post I set in that bridge, every stone I laid, was me trying to fix what I could not fix." He looked across the fire at her. "When I saw your carriage running wild, I did not think. I just reacted. But later, when Corbin tried to take you, that was a choice. I chose to help you because it was right, yes, but also because losing you would have felt like losing them all over again. I am not them, Vaughn, I know that, but maybe Vivian was right. Maybe I needed to save someone who could be saved to prove to myself that I am more than my failures. He rubbed his face. I do not know. I only know that I do not regret it, neither do I. Dara's voice was soft. Sleep well, Vaughn Voss. Sleep well, Dara Ashfeld. They reached the bridge station the next afternoon without incident and fell into a routine over the following days. Vaughn continued his warden duties, inspecting the bridge and the road, making repairs where needed. Dara helped where she could, proving herself strong and capable with tools. In the evenings they prepared for the magistrate's visit, going over Dara's testimony, making sure she could speak clearly about what had happened and what she had not consented to. A week passed, then 10 days. Vaughn began to hope that Thane had accepted the situation, or at least decided to wait for the magistrate rather than risk a confrontation. Then, on the 12th day, riders appeared on the road. Vaughn was on the bridge, replacing a section of railing when he saw them. 6 men, heavily armed with Corbin in the lead. He set down his tools and walked to meet them, feeling the familiar weight of the badge in his pocket. Corbin. What brings you back to my bridge? Corbin did not dismount. He sat his horse and looked down at Vaughn with cold satisfaction. Mr. Thane has decided he would like his property returned. We are here to collect. Dara Ashfeld is not property, and she is under territorial protection while awaiting the magistrate's judgment. Vaughn kept his voice level. You have no authority here. We have Mr. Thane's authority. That is enough. Corbin nodded to his men. 2 of them dismounted and moved toward the cabin. Vaughn stepped into their path. I am ordering you to leave. This is a territorial station and you are trespassing. We will leave when we have the girl. Corbin drew his pistol, not quite pointing it at Vaughn but making the threat clear. Step aside, Warden. The cabin door opened and Dara emerged. She was carrying the old hunting rifle Vaughn kept above the fireplace, and she held it with the easy competence of someone who knew how to use it. She leveled it at Corbin. You heard him. Leave. Corbin's eyes widened, then narrowed. Put that down, girl, before you hurt yourself. I grew up hunting deer to feed my family. At this range I will not miss. Dara's voice was steady, but Vaughn could see the white knuckle grip on the rifle. Go back to Thane and tell him I will see him in magistrate court. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Corbin's finger tightened on his pistol trigger, and Vaughn knew with sudden clarity that this was about to turn deadly. He moved without thinking, putting himself between the gun and Dara. Enough. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Corbin, if you fire that weapon, you are attacking a territorial officer and a witness under protection. That is a hanging offense. Is Garrick Thane worth your neck? Corbin's jaw worked. His men shifted nervously, hands on weapons but eyes uncertain. Finally, he lowered the pistol. This is not over, Voss. When Magistrate Holloway rules in Thane's favor, and he will, you will have made an enemy for nothing. He wheeled his horse. Enjoy your last few days of freedom, girl. You are coming to Dunmore crossing one way or another. They rode off in a cloud of dust and anger. Vaughn waited until they were out of sight before turning to Dara. She was still holding the rifle, her hands shaking now. Is it loaded? He asked gently. No, I could not find the ammunition. She lowered the rifle and looked at him with wide eyes. I thought if I could bluff them. You did well, better than well. Vaughn took the rifle and guided her back into the cabin, but we need to be more careful. Thane is not going to wait for the magistrate if he can take you by force. Then what do we do? Vaughn thought for a moment, then made a decision. We leave. There is a line cabin higher in the mountains, a day's ride from here. It is technically part of my patrol route, so I have reason to be there. We will wait out the remaining days until Holloway arrives, then come back for the hearing. Run and hide, you mean? Strategically withdraw to a more defensible position. Vaughn allowed himself a wry smile. Call it what you like, but I would rather not face 6 armed men with one old rifle and a work knife. Dara nodded slowly. When do we leave? At first light. Pack light and pack food. It is rough country up there. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Vaughn gathered supplies and made sure his tools and records were secured. Dara packed the little she had, including the precious copy of the contract that Vivian had given them. As the sun set, they ate a quiet meal and tried not to think about what might be coming. That night, Vaughn woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. He was on his feet instantly, knife in hand, moving to the door. Through the gap in the shutters he saw shadows moving in the moonlight, at least 4 men trying to be quiet and failing. He turned and climbed silently to the loft. Dara was already awake, sitting up with her eyes wide. They are here, he whispered. Out the back window. Go to the woods and do not stop until you reach the lightning-struck pine. I will meet you there. What about you? I will slow them down. Go now. Dara hesitated only a second, then moved to the small back window and squeezed through. Vaughn heard the soft thump of her landing outside, then the rustle of her moving into the trees. He descended the ladder and moved to the fireplace, where he had laid kindling for the morning. He scattered it across the floor, then pulled a lantern from its hook and smashed it. Oil spread across the boards. The front door shook as someone tested it, found it barred. Vaughn struck a spark and touched it to the oil. Flames licked up, caught the kindling, began to spread. He went out the back window just as the front door crashed inward. Shouts erupted behind him as the men realized the cabin was on fire. Vaughn ran for the trees, keeping low, thanking every god he could name for the darkness and the cover of the forest. Behind him, flames licked up the cabin walls. He felt a pang at the destruction of the place he had built, but it was just wood and stone. Dara's life was worth more. He found her waiting at the lightning-struck pine, a massive old tree that had been split down the middle by a storm years ago. She grabbed his arm when he appeared. I saw the fire. What did you do? Gave us a head start. He took her hand. Come on. We cannot use the road now. We will have to go overland. They moved through the forest in darkness, Vaughn navigating by landmarks he knew from years of patrol. The moon gave enough light to avoid the worst obstacles, but progress was slow. Behind them, they could hear shouting and the crackle of flames. Vaughn did not look back. By dawn they were miles away, high in the mountains where the pines gave way to bare rock and thin air. Vaughn led Dara to the line cabin, a small shelter built into the lee of a cliff face. It was cold and Spartan, but it was hidden and defensible. They collapsed inside, exhausted. Dara leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. You burned your home for me. I can build another home. I cannot replace you. The words came out before Vaughn could think about them, raw and honest. He looked away, suddenly self-conscious. The cabin was just a place. This is more important. Dara opened her eyes and looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the small space between them and took his hand. Thank you, Vaughn, for everything you have given up, everything you have risked. Her hand was warm in his, calloused from work, strong. Vaughn squeezed gently and then, because he could not help himself, lifted it and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Dara drew a sharp breath. He did not know how to finish the sentence. Did not know how to put into words the feeling that had been growing in him since the moment he pulled her from that runaway carriage. She solved the problem by leaning forward and kissing him. It was a soft kiss, tentative, a question asked with lips instead of words. Vaughn answered by pulling her closer, deepening the kiss, letting himself feel everything he had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. I am sorry, Dara whispered. I should not have. You have done so much already, I should not assume. Do not apologize. Vaughn cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. I have been wanting to do that since the moment you told me you would fight. I just did not know if I had the right. You have the right. If I have any say, you have the right. Dara smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. I am falling in love with you, Vaughn Voss. I know it is foolish and fast, and there are 100 reasons it is a terrible idea, but I am falling anyway. Then we are both fools. Vaughn kissed her again, softer this time, savoring it. Because I am falling too. They spent the next days in the line cabin, waiting for the magistrate's arrival and staying out of Thane's reach. It was a strange, suspended time, part hiding and part honeymoon. They rationed food carefully and kept watch in shifts. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories and dreams. And in the cold mountain nights, they held each other for warmth and comfort, the relationship deepening with every shared breath. On the 5th day, Vaughn made his way down to the main road to check for news. He found a notice posted at a crossroads. Magistrate Holloway would be holding court in Riverside Bend in 2 days' time. It was time to go back. They made the journey carefully, avoiding the main roads and staying alert for Thane's men. When they reached Riverside Bend the night before the hearing, Vivian met them at the edge of town and took them to her own small house. Thane has been making noise about you, Vaughn, she said as she set food in front of them. He is claiming you abducted his bride and destroyed territorial property. He has filed a complaint with the magistrate. Let him complain. We have the truth and we have the law. Vaughn looked at Dara. Are you ready for tomorrow? I am ready. She touched the folded document in her pocket. I will tell Holloway everything. The hearing was held in the meeting hall, a large room packed with onlookers curious to see the confrontation between the bridge warden and the mine owner. Magistrate Holloway sat at a long table at the front, a wizened old man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. Garrick Thane sat to one side with his lawyer, a slick man in expensive clothes. Vaughn and Dara sat opposite, with Vivian beside them as a witness. Holloway called the court to order and looked over his spectacles at the assembled parties. We are here to adjudicate 2 matters. First, the question of whether Dara Ashfeld is legally bound to marry Garrick Thane under the terms of a debt contract. Second, the accusation by Mr. Thane that Warden Vaughn Voss unlawfully interfered with said contract and destroyed territorial property. Mr. Thane, your case first. Thane's lawyer stood and presented the contract, making the argument that Dara had been legally bound by her father's agreement, and that her participation in the wedding carriage journey constituted consent. He described Vaughn's intervention as unlawful obstruction and the burning of the cabin as destruction of property. Holloway listened without expression, then turned to Vaughn. Warden Voss, your response. Vaughn stood. Your Honor, the contract in question contains a clause requiring written consent from the debtor's heir before marriage can be enforced. Miss Ashfeld never provided such consent. Without it, Mr. Thane has no legal claim to marriage, only to labor repayment, and forced labor without consent is bondage. He presented Vivian's certified copy of the contract. The records clerk can verify that this is an accurate copy of the filed document. Vivian stood and confirmed it. Holloway examined the document carefully, his eyes moving down the page. When he reached the consent clause, he paused. Mr. Thane, do you have written consent from Miss Ashfeld? Thane's lawyer shuffled papers. The consent was implied by her presence in the carriage, Your Honor. The contract specifies written consent. Do you have it or not? A pause. No, Your Honor. Then your claim to marriage is invalid. Holloway set the document down. Miss Ashfeld, did you burn Warden Voss's cabin? Dara stood, her voice clear and strong. No, Your Honor. Warden Voss burned it himself to delay the men Mr. Thane sent to abduct me by force. They came in the night, armed, without legal authority. The warden protected me and gave us time to escape. Abduct is a strong word, Thane's lawyer interjected. My client was simply seeking to recover property owed to him. I am not property. Dara's voice cracked like a whip. I am a free person. I did not consent to this marriage. I did not sign any document, and I was being taken against my will. That is abduction, not recovery. Holloway raised a hand for silence. I have heard enough. My ruling is as follows. The marriage contract between Garrick Thane and Dara Ashfeld is invalid due to lack of written consent. The debt remains valid, but Miss Ashfeld has the right to repay it through labor or other means of her choosing, not through forced marriage. He turned to Thane. As for the allegations against Warden Voss, I find that he acted within his authority to protect a witness and a free citizen from unlawful seizure. The destruction of his own property is his own concern, not yours. This case is dismissed. The hall erupted in murmurs. Thane's face went red with fury. He stood and jabbed a finger at Holloway. This is an outrage. That debt is owed, and I will collect it. You will collect it according to the law, Mr. Thane, or you will find yourself in front of me again on charges of bondage. I suggest you accept the ruling and move on. Holloway banged his gavel. We are adjourned. Vaughn felt the tension drain out of him like water from a broken vessel. Beside him, Dara was shaking, tears streaming down her face. He put an arm around her shoulders and she turned into his chest, holding on tight. It is over, he murmured into her hair. You are free. We are free, she corrected, her voice muffled against his shirt. They left the hall to find a crowd waiting outside. Some were onlookers, but others were people Vaughn recognized from the territory, farmers and settlers who had no love for Thane's methods. A few clapped as Vaughn and Dara emerged. One old woman, a human with a weathered face, caught Dara's hand. Good for you, girl. Good for you for standing up. That bastard has had this coming for years. Others echoed the sentiment. It was not a parade, but it was approval, and for Dara, who had expected nothing but rejection from humans, it seemed to mean everything. She smiled through her tears and thanked them. Vivian met them at her house with bread and wine. Well done, both of you. I thought Holloway was going to throw his gavel at Thane's head for a moment there. What happens now? Dara asked. The debt is still real. I still owe Thane money. You owe the estate, not Thane personally, Vivian corrected. And there are ways to manage debt that do not involve working in his mines. You could make payments over time. You could find work elsewhere and send money. The point is, you have choices now. Dara looked at Vaughn. What will you do? Your cabin is gone, your position. My position is secure. Holloway said so. Vaughn took her hand. As for the cabin, I will rebuild. It is just work, and I am good at work. Let me help. Dara squeezed his fingers. I am good at work too, and I owe you more than I can ever repay. You do not owe me anything. Then let me do it because I want to be there with you. She said it quietly, but there was no hesitation in her voice. Vaughn looked at Vivian, who was smiling into her wine cup. He looked back at Dara, at her strong face and amber eyes, and felt his heart make a decision his head had been dancing around for days. Then stay. Help me rebuild. And when the cabin is finished, if you still want to, stay longer. He took a breath. Stay as long as you like. Stay forever, if that is what you want. Dara's eyes went wide. Vaughn, are you asking? Not yet. Not until you have had time to be free to make choices without debt or danger hanging over you. Vaughn raised her hand to his lips again, the gesture that was becoming familiar between them. But someday, when you are ready, I would like to ask, if you think you might say yes. I think I might. Dara's smile was like sunrise. I think I very much might. They returned to the bridge station the next day, accompanied by Vivian and a few volunteers from Riverside Bend who wanted to help with the rebuilding. The cabin was a blackened shell, but the bridge itself was untouched and the road was still sound. Vaughn looked at the ruins and felt not despair but possibility. "We will build it better this time," he said. "Stronger." They spent the summer rebuilding. Dara proved herself as skilled with hammer and saw as Vaughn, and they worked side by side in the lengthening days. Other settlers stopped by to help, bringing supplies and labor in trade for Vaughn's continued protection of the road. A community grew up around the work, people of all kinds, human and orc and others, coming together for a common purpose. As the cabin took shape, so did Vaughn and Dara's relationship. They were partners in the work, but also in the quiet moments between. They talked about everything and nothing. They learned each other's rhythms and moods. And slowly, carefully, they built a foundation of trust that was deeper than passion, stronger than need. One evening in late summer, as the sun set fire to the mountains and the new cabin stood complete, Vaughn and Dara walked out onto the bridge. The river ran far below, its voice a constant song. Vaughn leaned against the rail where Dara had stood that first day, looking down at the water. "I built this bridge to make up for the one I failed to protect," he said. "Every board, every rope, every nail was me trying to fix the past, but I realize now that I was not fixing anything. I was just building a monument to guilt. And now," Dara asked softly, "now it is just a bridge. A good bridge, a strong bridge, but not a monument. The past is the past. Those people died and I could not save them, and I have to live with that, but I did save you. And you saved me in a different way." He turned to face her. "You taught me that life is more than making up for failures. It is about choosing to move forward." Dara took his hands in hers. "I was so angry when my father died and left me with his debts. I felt like my life had been taken from me, like I had no say in anything. And then you stopped that carriage and you gave me a choice. The first real choice I had had in a year. Every choice after that led me here to this moment, and I would not trade it for anything." Dara Ashfeld. Vaughn drew a breath, suddenly nervous despite everything they had been through. "I said I would wait until you were free to ask. You are free now. You have choices. So I am asking." He sank to one knee on the bridge, still holding her hands. "Will you marry me? Not because of debt or obligation, but because you choose to. Because you want to build a life here with me on this bridge and this road." Dara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, her whole face alight with joy. "Yes. Yes, Vaughn Voss, I will marry you. I choose you and this life and this bridge. I choose all of it." Vaughn stood and kissed her, and the river sang below them, and the mountains stood witness. When they finally broke apart, they were both laughing, giddy with happiness and relief. "When?" Dara asked. "Whenever you like." "Tomorrow, next week, next year. I am not going anywhere, neither am I." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "But maybe we wait until autumn. I would like Vivian to be there and whoever else wants to come. A real wedding, not a delivery." "Autumn, then." Vaughn wrapped his arms around her and looked out over the gorge, at the road stretching away into the distance. "We will be married here on the bridge, right at the place where everything changed." They were married in October, when the aspens turned gold and the air held the first promise of winter. Vivian stood as witness, along with 24 friends and neighbors who had become part of their lives over the summer. Magistrate Holloway himself performed the ceremony, having made a special trip to see the warden and the orc bride wed on their own terms. Dara wore a simple dress of blue wool that she had sewn herself. nothing like the elaborate white gown that had been forced on her. Vaughn wore his best shirt and trousers, the warden's badge pinned to his chest. They stood at the center of the bridge and spoke their vows clearly, each word a choice freely made. When Holloway pronounced them married, the assembled crowd cheered. Someone had brought a fiddle and someone else a drum, and music filled the air. They danced on the bridge as the sun set, human and orc and everyone in between, celebrating not just a wedding but the triumph of choice over coercion, love over obligation. As the party wound down and the guests began to drift away, Vaughn and Dara stood alone on the bridge one more time. The stars were coming out, brilliant in the mountain sky. "Are you happy?" Vaughn asked. "I am happy." Dara leaned against him, solid and warm. "I am exactly where I choose to be." They walked back to the cabin together, to the home they had built with their own hands. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth and their life together waited. It would not always be easy, Vaughn knew. There would be hard winters and difficult days. There would be people who disapproved of a human man married to an orc woman. But they would face it together, partners in every sense. That night, lying in the bed they now shared, Dara turned to Vaughn in the darkness. "Thank you for being close enough, for being fast enough, for not being too late. Thank you for screaming, for fighting, for choosing to stay." Vaughn kissed her forehead. "Thank you for choosing me." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and outside the bridge stood strong in the moonlight, a monument not to failure but to second chances and the courage to take them. The years that followed were good ones. Vaughn continued his work as warden, keeping the road safe and the bridge sound. Dara worked beside him, and also took on a role helping other orc families navigate the complicated laws and prejudices of the territory. She became known as someone who would fight for the vulnerable, who would not back down when faced with injustice. They paid off her father's debt over the course of 3 years, not to Thane but to the territorial administrator, who took over the contract when Thane was eventually arrested for actual bondage of orc workers in his mines. It felt good to close that chapter, to know that the past was truly settled. In their 4th year of marriage, Dara told Vaughn she was pregnant. He swept her up in his arms, laughing and terrified in equal measure. They prepared through the winter, gathering supplies and knowledge, enlisting Vivian's help to find a midwife who had experience with orc births. Their daughter was born in early spring, as the ice was breaking up in the river and the first flowers pushed through the last snow. She had Dara's green skin and Vaughn's dark hair, and when she opened her eyes they were a striking mix of amber and brown. They named her Zara, and she was perfect. Vaughn held his daughter in the cabin he had built, on the land he had claimed, with the woman he loved beside him, and felt a completeness he had never imagined possible. The old grief was still there, a quiet ache for the family he had not been able to save, but it was balanced now by joy. By life moving forward instead of being frozen in the past. Dara recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning day by day. As the weather warmed, they began taking Zara out onto the bridge, showing her the world she had been born into. She was a quiet baby, watchful, taking everything in with those unusual eyes. One morning, when Zara was about 3 months old, Vaughn carried her out to the bridge while Dara made breakfast. He stood at the rail and pointed out the river below, the road winding away into the distance, the mountains standing eternal against the sky. "This is your home, little one," he told his daughter. "This bridge, this road. Your mother and I built this life for you, and for whatever brothers or sisters come after. We built it on choice and courage and love. Never let anyone take those things from you." Zara made a small sound, her tiny hand curling around Vaughn's finger. He looked down at her, and saw not just his daughter but the future. All the years stretching ahead filled with possibility. Dara appeared in the cabin doorway, smiling at the sight of her husband and daughter silhouetted against the morning light. She walked out to join them, slipping an arm around Vaughn's waist. "What are you telling her?" "Everything. Nothing. That she is loved and free and the world is hers to choose." Vaughn kissed the top of Zara's head, then Dara's temple. "The important things. Good." Dara rested her head on his shoulder. She should know all of that from the start. They stood together, the three of them, on the bridge that had brought them together and held them safe. Below, the river ran on, eternal and uncaring. Above, the sky stretched wide and blue. And in between, a family grew, rooted in the place where a runaway carriage had stopped at the very edge of disaster, and a man had chosen to risk everything for a stranger's life. It was not a grand story, not the kind that would be sung by bards or written in histories. It was simply a story of ordinary people making extraordinary choices, of courage found in the moment it was needed, of love built carefully and deliberately in the aftermath of crisis. But it was their story, and it was enough. As summer deepened and Zara grew, the pattern of their lives settled into comfortable rhythms. Vaughn maintained the road and bridge, a job he had once taken as penance but now did with simple pride in work well done. Dara helped where she could and also took in the occasional traveler who needed a safe place to rest, extending the same shelter she had once desperately needed. They talked sometimes about the day the carriage ran wild, about how much had changed in so short a time, but they did not dwell on it. The past was the foundation they stood on, not a weight that held them down. One evening, after Zara had been put to bed and the cabin was quiet, Vaughn and Dara sat by the fire and talked about the future. About whether they wanted more children, about improvements to the cabin, about the possibility of Vaughn taking on an apprentice to help with the road work. "We could expand," Dara said thoughtfully. "Build a proper way station. There are more and more travelers on this road each year. We could offer real hospitality, not just emergency shelter." "You want to run an inn?" Vaughn smiled at the idea. "Why not? I like people, I like helping, and it would give us more security, more income." She poked at the fire. "Plus, I think your daughter should grow up seeing her mother build something the way she will see you build and repair." "Our daughter," Vaughn corrected gently. "And I think it is a fine idea. We will need more buildings, a stable, maybe a bathhouse. Then we build them. We know how." Dara leaned against him. "We are good at building." "We are," Vaughn agreed. "We are very good at building." And so they did. Over the next 2 years, the bridge station grew into a small but thriving way station. They built a stable for travelers' horses, a bathhouse with water piped in from the mountain springs, and a common room where people could gather for meals and conversation. Dara ran it with capable efficiency, and Vaughn balanced his warden duties with helping where needed. Travelers came to know the place as a safe haven, where they would be treated fairly regardless of their race or station. Word spread through the territory and beyond. The way station became a landmark. The bridge warden and his orc wife, a story people told to illustrate that the world was changing, that the old prejudices were giving way to something better. When Zara was 2 years old, Dara became pregnant again. This time it was a boy, born healthy and squalling in the heat of summer. They named him Torin, and he had Vaughn's brown skin and Dara's amber eyes, another beautiful blend of their joined heritage. Vaughn held his son and marveled at how full his life had become. Once, he had been a man haunted by failure, building a bridge in the wilderness to atone for lives he could not save. Now he was a husband and father, a warden and a way station keeper, surrounded by love and purpose. Dara recovered from Torin's birth even more quickly than she had from Zara's, and within weeks was back to running the way station with her usual energy. Vaughn sometimes watched her move through the common room, greeting travelers and managing the work, and felt a surge of pride and gratitude so strong it made his chest ache. One night, after the children were asleep and the way station was quiet, he told her what he was feeling. "I do not deserve you," he said simply. "I do not deserve any of this, but I am grateful every single day." Dara looked at him with those eyes that had first met his in terror and desperation, now filled with affection and exasperation in equal measure. "Vaughn Voss, you deserve exactly what you have built with your own hands and heart. Stop measuring your worth by old failures. You are a good man, a good husband, a good father. Accept it. I am trying. Try harder." But she smiled as she said it and kissed him, and they went to bed in the cabin they had built together, on the land they had claimed together, surrounded by the family they were raising together. The years turned. Zara grew into a bright, curious child who loved the bridge and the travelers who crossed it. Torin was quieter but no less observant, already showing signs of his father's patience and his mother's determination. The way station prospered. The road remained safe. And on clear nights, Vaughn would sometimes walk out onto the bridge and look down at the river, thinking of the day a runaway carriage had nearly plunged into those waters. Thinking of the scream that had brought him running, the desperate grab for the reins, the moment when everything could have gone terribly wrong but did not. He had been close enough that day, fast enough. For once in his life, when it mattered most, he had been exactly where he needed to be, exactly when he needed to be there. And everything that came after, all the love and joy and struggle and triumph, had flowed from that single moment of choice. The choice to risk everything for a stranger. The choice to stand between danger and an innocent. The choice to believe that some things were worth fighting for, even when the outcome was uncertain. Dara came out to join him one such night, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the mountain chill. She stood beside him at the rail, comfortable in the silence, until Vaughn spoke. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had not stopped the carriage, if I had been too slow or too far away?" "No." Dara's answer was immediate and certain. "I do not waste time on what might have been. You were close enough and fast enough and brave enough. That is all that matters. You are wise, Dara Voss. I am practical." She bumped his shoulder with hers. "And I am cold. Come back inside before your children wake and find us missing." "Our children," Vaughn corrected with a smile. "Our children," Dara agreed. They went back into the warmth and light of the cabin, closing the door on the night and the river and the bridge. And in the years that followed, they continued to build their life, adding to it brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. When Zara was old enough, Vaughn taught her to inspect the bridge, to test the ropes and check the boards. When Torin could walk, Dara showed him how to greet travelers with courtesy and warmth. The children grew up on the bridge, in the way station, surrounded by people of all kinds passing through on their journeys. They grew up knowing their mother's story, how she had been delivered like a package to a forced marriage, and their father had stopped the carriage and changed everything. They grew up understanding that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. They grew up loved and free and certain of their place in the world. And when they were old enough to understand the full weight of it, Vaughn and Dara told them about the family that had died on the old bridge, the failure that had haunted Vaughn for so long. They explained how sometimes you cannot save everyone, but that should never stop you from trying to save who you can. Zara listened gravely and asked if the new bridge was truly safe. Vaughn assured her it was, that he checked it every day, that he would never let happen again what had happened before. She seemed satisfied with that answer. Torrin asked if the family had been buried properly. When Vaughn said he did not know, the boy insisted they find out. So they made a journey to the old cemetery in the nearest settlement and found the graves, tended but unmarked. Vaughn paid for proper headstones, and the whole family stood together while they were set in place. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It was a way of honoring the past without being trapped by it, of acknowledging loss while still moving forward. After that day, the weight of the old failure seemed lighter somehow, not gone but integrated, accepted as part of who Vaughn was without defining all he could be. The way station continued to grow. They added more rooms, hired help from among the local settlers, developed a reputation for fair dealing and good food. People came not just because the bridge was convenient, but because the welcome was genuine. And at the center of it all were Vaughn and Dara, partners in every sense, building together the life they had chosen. Their love was not the passionate whirlwind of new romance, though the spark remained. It was something deeper and steadier, a partnership forged in crisis and tempered by time into something unbreakable. They had their disagreements, of course. Dara thought Vaughn was too protective of the children. Vaughn thought Dara took on too much work. They argued about money and priorities and how to handle difficult travelers. But they always talked it through, always found their way back to the foundation of respect and trust that held them together. One autumn evening, when Zara was 7 and Torrin was 5, a group of travelers arrived at the way station in distress. Their wagon had broken an axle on the rough road, and they had a sick child who needed help. Dara immediately took charge, settling the family in the common room, sending for the local healer, making the child comfortable. Vaughn went out with his tools to look at the wagon. The axle was cracked beyond field repair. It would need to be replaced. He told the travelers he would handle it and spent the next day crafting a new axle from seasoned wood he kept in the workshop. The sick child recovered under the healer's care and Dara's nursing. When the family was ready to leave, they offered to pay for the axle and the lodging, but the amount they could afford was clearly less than the actual cost. Vaughn waved away the shortfall. Pay what you can. The road is hard enough without adding to your burdens. The father, a weathered man with grateful eyes, shook Vaughn's hand. You are a good man, Warden. The world needs more like you. After they left, Dara found Vaughn in the workshop, putting away his tools. She slipped her arms around him from behind. You gave them the axle at a loss. They needed it. We need income too, I know, but they needed it more. Vaughn turned in her arms. Was I wrong? No, Dara kissed him. You were exactly right. This is who we are, who we choose to be. I just wanted to make sure you knew what you were doing. I always know what I am doing when you are beside me, liar, but a sweet liar. She pulled back and smiled. Come inside. Your daughter wants to tell you about the bird she saw today, and your son has questions about where rain comes from. Your family needs you. Our family, Vaughn said, as he always did. Our family, Dara agreed, as she always did. They went inside together, to the children and the fire and the life they had made. And the bridge stood strong behind them, carrying travelers safely across the gorge, a testament to skill and care and the determination never to let tragedy happen again when it could be prevented. The seasons turned and the years passed, and the way station at the bridge became a fixture of the territory, a place people could count on. Vaughn's hair began to show gray at the temples. Dara's hands grew more calloused from work. Their children grew tall and capable. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Vaughn had stopped the runaway carriage, they walked out onto the bridge together, just the two of them, and remembered. Remembered the terror and the courage, the screaming and the silence after, the moment when everything changed. They did not speak much during these yearly vigils. There was no need. They simply stood together and looked out over the land they had made their own, the life they had built, and felt the weight and wonder of all the choices that had brought them to this moment. Then they would go back inside, back to the work and the family and the endless small tasks of living, carrying with them the knowledge that they had been given something precious and rare. A second chance, a choice freely made, a love that had grown from crisis into something enduring and true. And at night, when the way station was quiet and the children asleep and the fire burning low, Vaughn and Dara would lie together in the bed they shared and talk about tomorrow, about plans and dreams and all the ordinary miracles of a life well lived. They had started with a scream from a runaway carriage and a man willing to risk everything. They had built from that foundation something solid and good and lasting. A home, a family, a future. It was more than enough. It was everything. And the bridge stood strong beneath the stars, holding them all safe, a monument not to failure or guilt, but to the simple truth that sometimes, when you are close enough and brave enough and willing to risk enough, you can save what matters most. And what you save might just save you in return.